Hi guys, today we're going to do a tutorial with 3D modeling using Autodesk MyLT. There's 3 steps involved: create objects, apply materials, and test animation. Alright, first is to create the polygon objects. So the goal here is to try to create a depth gauge built by 3 parts. The first will be a pipe. That'll be like the frame of the depth gauge. So we're going to start with around 10 radius, adjust the height to make it high enough. Then the thickness will set the thickness of the frame. So I want it nice and smooth, so we're going to create 100 subdivisions on the axis. That makes that nice smooth curve. We'll call it frame. Okay, so that's done. Next, we're going to create the centerpiece. That'll be the face of the depth gauge. So once again, it'll start, let's see here, radius about 9.5. We're going to make the subdivision axis, let's see here, let's try 100. As you can see, there's quite a few there, divisions and so forth. The problem with this is you're going to pay a price on the performance. See how many vertices and triangles this will create. So that's expensive in your processing power. So what we're going to do is, since you're not going to see the edge, we're going to reduce it to 10. As you can see here now, it's simpler, but you're not going to see the edges of it. So now you look up here, see now the vertices and the triangles are much lower, so the object's simpler. When you're moving these objects in VR or any other game engines, the simpler the objects are, the better, easier on the processing. So I'm going to reduce the height. See, now you don't see the edge anymore, and it won't matter on the face. So we'll call this face. Third part's going to be the needle of the depth gauge. This will be based on a simple cube. So what we're going to do here, adjust the size of this, make it a little narrow because needles are narrow. The depth, the depth will be longer along that z-axis, and then height, it'll be shallow. So this is going to disappear temporarily because it's so thin. But what we're going to do, as you can see, is we're going to zoom in and raise it just above the face of the depth gauge. So now you can see it. It's not meant to be really thick, so there it is. We'll call this the needle. Next is to apply the materials, the shaders, and textures. This gives the imagery, or what will be kind of reflected on the objects, versus just generic shapes without any detail. So what we're going to do is going to add with the standard Phong shader. And then you have to set, we're going to set the color to a file. Since this is the face, I have an image ready here. It's the depth gauge face. So you pick it, but as you can see, it's not quite in the right position or the right size. So the next thing to do is you select face, and we'll select all the faces, and we'll create what we call UV planar projection. So it's like taking a planar, the image, and kind of gluing it on one specific face of the object. I'm making it bigger. Okay. But as you can see here, it's large enough, but there's one problem is, see, it's perpendicular to the face. So the way to solve this is we're going to set to simply rotate it, the planar projection, to match, to be, parallel to the face of the depth gauge. So I turned it, I rotate 90 degrees there, but it's still not quite right, so we need to rotate it on the other axis there. So now you can see the face, the details there, you see the detail of the gauge, it's mapped correctly onto it. So what's next? Let's do the frame. The frame, similarly, we're going to find a file map it, select it for the shader, the Phong shader, and it's on there, but guess what? It's not mapped correctly again. So we'll do the same trick. Click face, we select all the faces on the frame, and we're going to do the same thing, a UV projection, planar projection on the front. I'm going to make it bigger because sometimes if it's too small, you don't know what the actual plane looks like. So I'm going to make it big enough so you get, it's probably as expected before, just like before, it's perpendicular. So we want to rotate it. So let's rotate it so it maps there. But just to be consistent, we'll map it the same exact way and then there. So we have that nice metal frame. It's on the imagery, the texture is now mapped on there. So let's do the needle. This is going to be a little bit trickier. Once again, create a new Phong shader, but with a separate file, image file. So I have that ready here. So I have a depth gauge needle. You'll notice it's a PNG and there's no background. It's a transparent background. That's the way we want it because I don't want it to project over the rest. So all I want to see is the image of the needle itself. Let's do the face. Now we got to do the planar projection again. You selected the face facing us. We'll go UV planar projection. Now we're going to adjust. We have to rotate it again as well as adjust the size a little bit. I'm going to make it bigger. Just usually a square shape's good with a large enough size so you can see, once again, it's perpendicular. So same trick we did before, rotate until it's mapped on that face prop. Now it's mapped, but we need to rotate it again and there. So now the needle is facing the appropriate direction. Now we got to center it a little bit right on the cube. So that's the first goal. So you got to get centered on the face of the object you would be turning in the game or application. Okay, so that's centered. Now, what's one problem? It's not quite centered on the face of the depth gauge. So let's say I try to rotate it. As you can see, it's the center of the needle is not on the center of the depth gauge. So let's try to fix that. We're going to move it. So let's zoom in, move it along that one axis so it overlaps the background image and the two images are aligned. So this is trying to be precise as you can. That looks pretty good. So I usually like zooming in. I'm particular. I like it just right. So now we'll rotate it. Let's test the rotation. This will be the animation. I'm going to rotate it in the modeling. But look, it's rotating, but it's not quite on the center of the axis on the image. So what can we do with that? So there's a trick here. You shift the pivot. You shift to pivot mode. You click D, and then we're going to move that pivot center right over the center of the needle. So now when it turns, it won't turn on the whole center of the cube. It'll turn on this specific point. So I shift it out of the mode. Now I'll test it. And now it seems to work. So that'll allow for it to rotate exactly where I want it. Often you'll need to do that with objects. It's not going to be right in the center of the object after you create it. So now the next thing you do, of course, you would save your scene. You save scenes in my LT is the LT file. So that's this scene or project. But then you'd have to export everything to the FBX format. So you need to do that, and then that would be the file you would import into Unity, along with any images. All the mappings are embedded in that file. So when Unity gets the model, it'll get that, and then if you put the appropriate images on there as well, it'll be good.